All right, well, today we're kicking off a brand new series. A new series we're talking about relationships. Now, before we get into it, I want to tell you a little story. So, when I was younger, probably about 5 or 6 years old, I was in church with some family members. I was sitting next to my aunt, my great aunt. It was a Catholic church, and we're sitting in the pews, and during the service, I leaned over to her, and I said, I think when I grow up, I'm going to be a priest. And she looked at me and she said, oh, okay. Why do you want to do that? And I said, because then I'll never have to get married. So that's how it all began. No, I'm just kidding. So we're talking about relationships. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about relationships. Now, let me just say this right off the bat here. If you're single and you have no plans to ever get married or to be in a relationship, there are some principles here that really transfer to all relationships. But it's going to be on you a little bit to do some of the translating because we're going to be using the language of romantic relationships. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be looking at a model, a way of handling relationships that is so radical. It is so extreme, so countercultural, over the top, that most of us at first glance would be like too intimidated to embrace, to adopt. Most of us at first glance wouldn't want much of it. But time and time again, this way of handling, of seeing, of doing relationships has been proven to lead to the kind of relationships that most of us dream of being. One that you value, not one that you just take care of, one that you treasure, not one that you just maintain or live with, but one that you see as something extremely valuable. A relationship that's intimate, that's connected, where you feel known and where you know the other person. It's the kind of relationship that most of us dream of if you dream of being in a relationship. But it's extreme. It's radical. It's countercultural. And it's definitely not the norm. We're looking at the inner workings of relationships. What's going on beneath the surface? Especially today, we're looking at what's going on beneath the surface of relationships when there's a problem. And so if you're here right now and you're single, or if you're watching online and you're single, and you're hoping to one day be in a relationship, understanding relationships in this way can really start you off in the right direction. Or if you're in a relationship right now, and it's the best, amazing, like everything is just working right, happy all the time, well, congrats, one. And two, this I think even can give you language for why things are working when they're working. But if you're like a lot of people, like what's the norm in culture today, and your relationship can use a little bit of work, or maybe a lot of work, my hope for you is that this will give us hope and show us the way forward. But it's extreme. It's different. It's a little intimidating. So here's the question we'll start with. When a relationship, think about this, when it's working, what's working? Like, why? Maybe you've witnessed relationships, or maybe you're one of those people in a relationship where everything is going well, it's amazing, it's fantastic. What's happening? So I have these friends, and if you were with us before COVID, some of this might sound familiar in our BC days in 2020. I told you about these people, my friends, really great people. We'll call them Romeo and Juliet, okay? Their relationship is just the best, just always the best, you know? And they never argue. It doesn't seem like there are ever any problems. They're both super happy to be together all the time. It's just amazing, you know? And if you're in a relationship like this, most of us probably resent you a little bit. No, so anyway, so one day he and I are hanging out, we're talking, and we're actually on a bus. We were going somewhere, and we're going on a trip with some students. And he looks at me and he says, I'm just a little shaken up. You know, I got into a big argument last night with my wife. And I was like, finally. No, I didn't say that. I was like, oh, okay, really, I'm so sorry to hear that. Tell me what happened. And he's like, well, they have little kids. He said one of the baby woke up in the middle of the night. We both jumped out of bed. And she looked at me right away and she said, you have work tomorrow. You need to go back to sleep. And I looked at, he's telling me a story, he goes, and I looked at her and I said, no, you need to go back to sleep. You have to let me carry some of the parenting load. And he said, we just went back and forth about which one was gonna go back to sleep. And we were arguing and we couldn't really, get it solved. She wanted me to go to sleep. I wanted her to go to sleep. And I'm listening to this story and I'm just thinking like, oh, you're just gross, It's not a problem. Yeah, I'm so sorry. You guys love each other so much, But it's like, really, if we're honest, most of us, if you want to be in a relationship, you want that, where the other one is in the other one's corner. And so the question is, how did they get there? What did they do? What do they have figured out? What do they know that so many people don't? So many of us don't. Did they just find the one? Right? Like they got it, 7 billion of us, and boom, they found the one, he found the one, she found the one, they were both each other's one, and they hit the nail on the head, they hit the jackpot. Or maybe I've heard more spiritual versions of this where it's like, oh, we went to a church service together and we were just praying, and like right there, God told me you're gonna marry her. And that's how I knew. I never second guessed it again, And I'm just thinking all right, I'm not saying that didn't happen, that's great, but it doesn't seem fair to me. I had to make that decision on my own and you had divine revelation to help you, right? Or maybe they've just got chemistry, they work. And we don't have that chemistry. We found out 6 months into a relationship, we got different Enneagram numbers. And so we're incompatible. What is it? What do they know that we don't quite know, or that most of us at least lose sight of? The best way that it was explained to me is like this. I didn't come up with this, and again, if you were with us in our BC days, you might remember this illustration. But you and I, in our days when we are not with someone, growing up, we have this concept of what a good relationship is supposed to look like, of what we want. And these things, they're not right or wrong, they just are. We could say there are desires, right? This is what I hope, dream, desire in someone, somewhere out there, someday. And so we got all these things in our box, one day I wanna find someone. Maybe, wouldn't it be great if I could start a family and we can have kids together? Someone who's thoughtful and leaves me little notes around the house, wouldn't that be great? Or maybe, someone who's gonna help me clean the house, right? Or maybe, one day I'm gonna find someone that will cook or will make it so that I don't have to cook, or whatever. And again, these aren't right or wrong. They're just things we pick up along the way from Disney movies, from TV shows, from our experiences. And again, maybe yours are traditional, maybe yours are untraditional, but the fact is we come into a relationship with all these desires, I want someone who's gonna help me grow in my faith, right? Or I want someone who's one day we're gonna travel the world together. It's gonna be amazing. Finally, I'm gonna be able to get that car that I really wanted, and we've got all of these things. Desires. And when a relationship is working, the thing that's driving the relationship is desire. We were made, it's a core need. We were made to feel desired. We want to desire and be desired in return. And so what happens is we've got this box, it's formed, and then we take it on the road. We're like walking around, you meet someone, you're like, nope, not him. Right? We're measuring people up based on what we desire. And then there comes a day, where you find someone. And it's like, I think this is the one, It's got most of this. Maybe not all of it, but he'll learn. And there it is. Then there's this relationship that's living out of desire. And here's what happens. And you know this if you've been in a relationship, especially at first you meet somebody and it's like, they do what I love. I desire that, and they're doing it. And so immediately you feel grateful. You appreciate it. You feel valued because they're doing what you desire. It makes you feel valued, and you desire them in return, right? It's laying the foundation for intimacy. And the two of you, it's like this cycle. I desire you, you desire me. And this is when a relationship is great. This is when it's easy to overlook like all the little flaws, all the little things that are maybe a little bit, and you can overlook those things. You're willing to do things that you wouldn't normally be willing to do. I remember when Allie and I first started dating, she went away for a while. She went to Europe. She was on this trip, and we were emailing each other while she was gone, and we missed each other. We had just started dating. The relationship was like really exciting, really great. And one day she sends me an email. She's like, my parents are coming up from Virginia. They're going to be at the airport to get me off the plane. Then we're going to spend the night in New York City, and you should come and spend the night out there with us. It's going to be, and I'm like, wow, she invited me to go and be with her family. Yes, this is going to be amazing. It's going to be fantastic. And she's like, yeah, the only thing is that they got everything booked already. You're going to have to share a bed with my dad. And I was like, okay. And that night I slept like a board, didn't move the whole night. And now he's my father-in-law, he's great, and I would love to share a bed with him. But back then, it was a little bit of a stretch. But desire, you can overlook, fine, I'll go that extra mile for you, I'll do it. And this is when the relationship is great. I remember when we first got married, we were just a few weeks into the marriage. And we're sitting there, we're on the couch, we've got the laundry bins, and I'm trying to figure out how to fold clothes, which is not my gifting, And I'm sitting here and I'm trying to whatever. And finally she looks over to me and she says, listen, I like folding clothes. It's therapeutic for me. Let's make this my job. I'll do it. I'll be the one who does the laundry. And I looked at her and I was like, really? Are you sure? And she said, yeah, I'm sure. And I just walked out of the room slowly. And I haven't brought it up in 10 years. But it's this you're doing what I want. And it makes me feel valued. It makes me feel grateful, valued, desired. And so there's a connection, what we've been craving from the start. But over time, there's this shift. And it's subtle, and it's not intentional. But what happens is we go from, maybe one day we'll have a family together, raise kids, to what do you mean you're not ready yet? What do you mean you don't want to have more kids? Or we go from maybe one day someone will travel the world and it'll be to why are all our friends going away and we're not? Or it's, wouldn't it be great if someone cleaned that? That would just be amazing. Do I have to come home again to a house that's dirty? Or I can't believe I don't have to do laundry. Why can't I find my favorite shirt? You see, if we're not careful, what happens is over time, unintentionally, sometimes in a moment, but often gradually, what we desired from someone out there someday becomes what I expect from you. The desires over time turn into expectations. And you know this, right? Like expectations, with expectations, there's no room for gratitude when an expectation is met because it's what you were supposed to do. You agreed. You said you would. I thought we had an understanding. We talked about this in counseling. You made a vow. But there's a ceiling on how high, on how far you can go with an expectation. There's no room for gratitude. There's no room. When you do what you're supposed to do, it doesn't make me feel valued. It just makes me feel like you didn't mess up. And I don't desire you because there's no room for desire in that equation. And so, like, very quickly, expectations eliminate the things that, like, build the foundation of intimacy. Because you're just doing what you're supposed to do. There are no feelings. And what makes this so hard is that you can totally justify your expectations. I'm not saying it's wrong to have expectations, but where there is an expectation, feelings will never follow, right? So think about it like this. Allie and I have been married for almost 10 years, and there has never once been a night where she did not allow me to sleep indoors, right? Never. And so it's become an expectation. Like every night when it's time to go to sleep, I come inside. That's where sleep happens. But because it's an expectation, what I can tell you is that I have never once been grateful for the fact that I'm sleeping indoors. Whatever becomes an expectation immediately loses the capacity to lead to a greater sense of intimacy because you're simply not losing when you're meeting an expectation. Think about your mortgage. If you have a mortgage or had a mortgage or one day might have a mortgage, think about this. We have a mortgage. Because we have a mortgage, we have a house. I couldn't have a house if it wasn't for a mortgage. Somebody gave us a crazy amount of money, like not an amount of money that people typically give other people, but I was given a lot of money to be able to purchase a house. And now I give a lot of my money back every month. In fact, it's more money than I originally got. And so look, we have two parties who have given each other so much, who are highly invested in one another. But there's no emotional connection between me and my lender because there are expectations, because I signed on the dotted line and so did they. I do my part, they do their part, and we're fine. We're fine. No matter how invested we are, when there is an expectation, there's no feeling of intimacy or closeness. In fact, my lender changed. One lender sold my mortgage to another one. I found out they sent me a letter in the mail. I didn't care because there's no connection there. And so what happens? What happens when an expectation is not met? You're left with debt. Debt. You didn't do what you're supposed to do. And so you owe me. You owe me. You fell short. You were supposed to do this. I expected this of you. And now there is a debt that has not been paid. And when you're living in a relationship that is built and driven by expectations, at its best, it is simply two people trying not to owe the other side. And and maybe you felt this way before where it's like, all right, I got to do this because she doesn't like it if I don't, or when he comes home or when I see him, he likes things to be like, right, and we're just like trying to avoid not owing the other side. And that's like at its best, with the emotional connection level of a mortgage company and the person that it gives money to. And at its worst, it's two people like constantly reconciling their debts, like constantly fighting for what they deserve. You said we were gonna do this. You're supposed to do this. This is your job. This is your role. And there's just no room for joy in that relationship with all of these expectations. Because once there is an expectation, you take away the ability to feel gratitude, to feel value, to feel desired. They're just doing what they're supposed to. And so maybe you're in a relationship right now where you don't feel valued by the other person. And maybe it's not because they're not doing something. Maybe it's because you're seeing what they do as an expectation. It's what they're supposed to do. So it doesn't make me feel grateful or valued or desired, right? But maybe they are doing it because they care about you. Expectations create a debt. They're either met and you're congrats, back to zero. It's about time. It's about time you cleaned the house, about time you showed up, about time you did this, about time you did that. There's no room to win. You can only lose, and you either meet the expectation or you create debt. And so what do? Well, you have a few options. You can quit, right? You take your box and get back on the road. Find someone else. And maybe you'll have more realistic expectations, but they'll still be expectations. And they'll stay, if they stay expectations, you're still gonna bring them into a relationship that is you're gonna have trouble feeling that sense of connection in. Or you can win. You can win. Like often in a relationship, there's a stronger personality. There's the one who's like the better arguer. There's one who's more persistent. You can just wear them down until they say, fine, I'll just be who you want me to be. You want me to do this? Fine. And so inevitably, then someone else loses. But what's interesting is that often both sides think they're the side that's losing because the one who's pushing it feels like they were never getting what they were supposed to begin with, and the one who's adapted feels like they're the one who's conforming. And so both sides end up losing, or you can tie, which is compromise. That's the mortgage relationship. It's a relationship that's categorized by scorekeeping, constantly making sure the scales are even. I did this for you, now I get to do this. You do this, I do this, and it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. As long as it's even, and we'll make it through. We'll figure out how to compromise and we'll make it, but that's not a relationship that's characterized by intimacy. That's not what, you might make it, but that's not what we're going for. If you want to know if you're acting out of expectation, if you've been with us for a little bit, you know that the whole idea of you owe me, those are the words of anger. Like when you feel anger, it's because you feel like you weren't given something that you should have. And so if you want to know what are the expectations, just think, when's the last time you got angry? And what was it about? Probably you can trace it right back to an unmet expectation. They didn't do that, and now they owe you. They were supposed to, they didn't live up to it. Now I have a right to be angry at you because you were supposed to do this. And it just sucks the joy, connection, intimacy, trust out of the relationship. So what do we do? Move to the mountains and live in a hut, like all by yourself. What's amazing is that the best model that we have of how good a marriage could be, of what a marriage could look like, is actually from a guy who never got married. Jesus, and you've heard us talk about this passage before if you've been with us, on his last night, like to give his followers who were gonna carry on this enterprise, who were going to take this movement out to the world, his marching orders for them, the last thing, he said, a new command I give you, a new command. Like, you've got the old ones, right? This is a new one. This is the one that trumps all the other ones. Here it is. He says, love one another. Now, like, if you're them, you're like, we know that already. But this isn't love your neighbor as yourself. The new part is the standard that he sets. He says, love one another as I have loved you, so you love one another. And it's not like, he's not just saying be kind. He's saying, like, you've seen me. You have seen the way I've cared for people that nobody cares for, the way I've given and expected nothing back, how much I've sacrificed for people, the attention that I've given people. And eventually what he would go on to do is, like, give his life for these people. He's not just saying, like, be nice. He's saying, watch how far I will go. And once that clicks for you, once you're overwhelmed by just how much I've done for you, well, then you go show that same thing to the rest of the world. And in the context of relationships, right, like, this is like, there is no place where a relationship is more concentrated than in a marriage, in a romantic relationship. And these followers of Jesus, they went out and they changed the world because of the way they treated other people, the way they treated one another, and because of how it looked in their marriage. They were in a culture where no one valued women. And these men were, like, giving themselves up for their women. And no one had seen anything like that before. And so these followers of Jesus who got these commands, they went on and they would write letters to explain to the church, this is what this looks like in everyday life. And they would explain, okay, when Jesus did this, here's what it meant, and here's how we should understand it. And the Apostle Paul, someone we often refer to as Saint Paul, he wrote a lot of these letters. And here's how he explained the way that Jesus showed his love for us. The most famous way that he showed his love for us. He said, he forgave us all our sins, like all our shortcomings, all the areas, not just like what we did, but what we will do, what we're planning on doing, what we're going to do, past, present, future. He took them away from us. Having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. Like, it left no room for argument or interpretation. Like, it's as if he's trying to, like, paint a picture of, imagine everything that you ever did wrong. Every shortcoming you have, every issue, everything you knew I probably shouldn't, but you did, like, every time. Imagine if that was recorded, all right? He took that, he canceled it, it stood against us, left no room for argument. He's taken it away and he nailed it to the cross. In other words, like, when Jesus died on the cross, what Paul is trying to help his readers understand, he's like, I want you to imagine everything you've done wrong, that debt, and imagine it going with him. Like done, gone. Side note, especially if you're new to church, right? A lot of times when people think about God and the church and following Jesus, it feels like a debt you owe. Like, oh, now I'm doing this thing. I got to do this, and I got to, check these boxes. And it feels like a weight. Like, now I've agreed to all these things, right? That's backwards. That's backwards. This is supposed to feel like a debt paid, not a debt owed. It should feel like weight taken off of you, not weight put on you. That's what's so freeing, what's so good about it. And so he's saying, imagine all your flaws, like, taken away, nailed to the cross, gone. And so now, in light of that, you hear Jesus' words again to say, like, just as I have for you, so you for one another. And this is where it gets extreme. Right? Where there are expectations, there will be debt. There will be debt. If you want to know those couples where it just seems like it's working, where it just seems like they always want to be together, there's not this mountain of, like, they're not just carrying grudges, like, ready to just get each other all the time. You want to know the secret? They may not articulate it this way, but they give everything and they expect nothing. And that's extreme. That's Jesus's as I, so you. Like he gave everything for us, not because we earned it, not because we figured it out, not because we checked the boxes, but because like he gave everything so that we would owe nothing. And he's saying, now go take this to your relationships. Give everything and expect nothing. Now, right away, like, okay, this is, if you're like me, it's hold on, I got a lot of questions, right? What if I'm taken advantage of? What about my desires? There's all these feelings of really exposure, of vulnerability. But if you know vulnerability, you know you can't have intimacy. You can't have connection without real vulnerability, without putting yourself out there. And when you are vulnerable, and then like you're treated the right way in return, that's when trust begins to form. Even though she does it every single day, even though he does it every single day, this takes work. But if you bring yourself to the place to think like, I will not expect it. She did it, but she didn't have to. He did it, but he didn't have to. Over and over again, what will shift within you are your feelings. Eventually, you'll start to feel like grateful. If he didn't have to, if I wasn't expecting that, if that wasn't something he was supposed to do, you'll start to feel grateful. You'll start to feel valued. You'll start to feel the change will happen in you before it happens in them. And I don't want to get too much into what we're talking about next week, but can you just imagine how amazing it is to think of two people doing this? Two people totally invested in the opposite party? Like it's extreme. It's over the top. It's over the top. It's vulnerable. But that's where you open the door for gratitude to come back in, for intimacy to come back in. And it's where you start to close the door to anger, to that feeling like you were supposed to. You owe me. Why didn't you? I thought we agreed. You said you would. You said you would. We can fight. We can keep score. We can try to make sure it's fair. But feelings of intimacy don't follow that. The score might be even, but there won't be feelings of connection. And so I'm gonna ask the band to come back up, but here's some handles I wanna put on this. I know this is intense. I know this takes work, because it's work in the mind to teach yourself to think a different way. So what if just for 1 week, you said, okay, this week, if you're in a relationship, this week, I will give everything. And I will expect nothing. There will not be a moment where I feel like you were supposed to and you didn't. I'll expect nothing in return. Or what if like maybe that's, too much? Maybe, there goes the TV. Maybe you're like, I didn't sign up for 7 days. Maybe you just say 1 day. You can't do 1 week, just 1 day. Thanks. 1 day. Maybe you pick a day for real, a day this week where you say, okay, that day is gonna be the day when I expect nothing. I will not get angry. I will not give a one supposed to. I will give everything, I will expect nothing. Maybe it'll be the day that you're not gonna see them at all, and it'll be nice and easy. Or if you're not ready to do that, what if? Maybe you're just sitting here listening like, okay, I don't want homework. That's totally fine. There's gotta be room to just listen and take it in sometimes. But what if you just asked one question? One question. Maybe you ask it in the shower. Maybe you ask it in the drive to work. There's some time when it's quiet and you can think. If you're in a relationship, the question you ask is, what do they owe me? What do I feel like if they don't do, they owe me? And even in just doing that, I think we'll have some clarity. I think you'll say, okay, maybe it's not fair. Maybe we at least need to define this. But what if we started taking steps in that direction? Next week, we're gonna dive deeper into what this model looks like. Eventually, we're gonna talk about what to do with the desires in your box. But for today, that's what I wanna leave you with. 1 week, or one question, or one day.